Good morning, welcome to Fretboard Refugee. This is not one of my regular shows. This isn't a weekly roundup or anything. This is just something I wanted to cover really briefly for beginners, for those thinking about getting into the guitar, for those who've recently started the guitar. And that is picking considerations. What do you pluck the strings with, and what are your options? Obviously the answer is kind of common sense. You either use a pick or your fingers or some combination thereof, but I kind of wanted to go over how to think about that choice and what the strengths and weaknesses of different methods are. So your options range from your fingers, your hands, through finger picks and thumb picks, all the way to flat picks. That's really the whole spectrum. So let's talk about fingers first. Well, there's people who use the flesh of their fingers, and there's classical players with nylon strings who will generally use their nails to actually pick. That's going to be kind of hard on steel strings to pick, at least up pick with your nails, because it's going to tear up your nails. There are people who use polycarbonate fake nails, and there are people who use various treatments to make their nails harder, who have had good luck with that, but still it's a struggle to keep them from ripping and breaking. I bite my nails, so that's not really an option for me. So in terms of using your fingers, there's generally you're going to be doing what's called up picking. So let's say we're on a minor chord. So if you're finger picking in like an arpeggio style, where you're using finger picking as a way of voicing a chord, not so much like a thumb bass and then melody on the upper strings, but actually like using the whole chord with all your fingers. So that might look like, your bass string is going to be the A, and you're going to have 3 fingers on the 3 bottom strings. So it might go like 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you're going to want your thumb to be closer to the tuning machines in most cases, up this way, and your fingers to be back here to a degree. And you're going to have to experiment to find the exact angle, but there is that as an option. There is also, what we've called, the fingerstyle blues style of finger picking, the non-accompaniment style or the chord melody style, which is going to be less of just a pattern played over one chord and more like a steady bass where you're hitting scale notes or chord notes. That sort of thing. And again, flesh of your fingers is going to be the ticket there. Now, banjo players, bluegrass banjo players up pick, like I was just showing you, except they generally do it with finger picks. But old-time banjo players do something called frailing. And that looks kind of like, not normally a guitar technique, but I've played with it. So that's, you're going to pick with your thumb, but when it comes to your fingers, you're going to use the nail on the back of the finger to kind of flick downward on the strings. So that might look like. Now it's easier to hit chords than it is individual notes that way, but especially if you're using kind of percussive taps, that can be a fun way to play. So you can use that flick along with string muting pretty organically to create a kind of a chugging effect. Now let's talk about the in-between options. There's thumb picks, which kind of stick out the side of your thumb like this, and they enable you to kind of hit that bass note a lot harder. In a pinch, you can also strum all the strings with the thumb pick. It's kind of just a flat pick bolted on your thumb, in a sense. So Gives you some options. It also limits you somewhat. Like you can't really, you can hit quiet notes, and you can still use your palm muting to make that as stumpy or as melodic as you want it to be. But this is also gonna create another thing to learn. So let's look at, talked about the Piedmont roll before. I'm gonna kind of use that as an example here. First of all, let's do the Piedmont roll with no picks whatsoever on an A minor. So that kind of goes second string, fourth string, first string, bass string, whatever that is. In this case, the fifth string. So. Let's see how that changes with the thumb pick. First of all, it's going to be harder for me because I don't practice that much with a thumb pick, but so you can see that adds a little thump to those bass notes, makes them a little louder. And depending on my degree of palm muting, I can make them more or less percussive. So that kind of gives them more of a bass emphasis and less of a melodic emphasis. Now, let's look at, and people are generally going to employ these with a thumb pick, but finger picks. Now, your instinct might be to put these on like witch fingernails, but the general way they are used is actually like this, because you're going to be picking up, and you want this to glide over and kind of snap the string at the end, but not catch the string. So we'll go back to that A minor and we'll do the Piedmont roll with these. You can see that drastically increases the attack and the loudness of the note. It's not usually done, but you can also, if you really want to emphasize the melody, you can use the finger picks and no thumb pick. So that would be. Awkward for me. I barely practice with those at all. Now let's talk about the traditional flat pick. I'm going to use a generic example here. Well, this is not generic. This is actually one of my favorites. This is a Golden Gate extra stiff large triangle. So the world of picks, guitarists are very loyal to the picks they like and very dismissive of the picks they don't like as a general rule. So I'm gonna find, I mean, there's really no thing as an average pick or a middle of the road pick, or I'm just gonna find the most generic pick I can. Hold on a second. Okay, so this is just a plastic, somewhat thin pick. And the thickness is going to be your main variable here. So this is actually, I don't know, this is something somebody has their website branding on. So it's probably something I picked up for free somewhere. So this flexes a little bit as it goes over the strings. So it kind of like doesn't like catch one string like that as much as a stiffer pick would. And especially if you have your wrist relaxed, it allows you to smoothly glide over the strings. Now let me, so for chordal playing, for strumming, a lot of players like a floppier pick because it does that thing where it bends and it glides over the strings and kind of releases them smoothly. Let me grab a floppier pick if I can find one. Okay. Here we go. So this is a Dunlop 0.46 millimeter, very flexible. So this will give us a try to pick an individual string with this, it's going to be a little less precise. And you're going to kind of hear the pick do that even over the sound of the guitar. So this is like an average size and very thin pick. Now, a lot of people, especially for single note playing, fast playing, solo playing, lead line playing, will use what's called a jazz style pick. Now that is a tiny, so talking about something that's significantly shorter. So there's really more control. Just by default, you are choked up much and there's just part of the pick sticking out. This is great for hitting individual notes with some degree of precision. And so on. You can still strum with it. It's going to be a little stiffer and you're going to have your fingers closer to the strings, so they're going to interfere a little more if you're not careful. But still, you're perfectly capable of strumming with this. Now, in the bluegrass world, people like stiff or bigger picks, and they do what is called flat picking, which is a combination of chordal, well, I mean, it's all flat picking, but when people say flat picking with a capital F, they're usually talking about a bluegrass style of play that includes chords and bass runs and a regular strum that sometimes targets individual strings, sometimes targets like all the treble strings, and sometimes will just hit a bass string. So because of their need for both precision and sweeping, bluegrass players tend to like picks that are a little stiffer, a little thicker. This is on the low end of that. Still has some flex to it, and it's the right size and shape for strumming chords, but it's also stiff enough to hit individual notes with authority. This is made by Golden Gate. Golden Gate makes, I think, very high quality, very affordable picks. Now, a lot of bluegrass people will use Wagon picks or blue chip picks. We're talking about picks here that cost like $50 for a pick. And they're made out of materials that supposedly make a huge difference. Maybe they do. I've never tried them. I can't afford to try them. But if you're going for that effect, this is a Jim Dunlop large triangle, and I forget what this is called. There's some name for this line of picks. Well, I'll post it in the discussion later, but these are like a few bucks each. They're expensive as cheap picks go, but they're not expensive picks. This is about maybe 2 millimeters thick. It doesn't really have much or any flex to it. It is a little transparent, like I can see the sun through it if I hold it up. And this has like a bevel, so it's very stiff, but it can also glide off the strings because of its shape, because the way it thins towards the edge. And I really enjoy this for like strong, loud strumming, but it's also precise enough that you can pick up individual notes like. Jim Dunlop, wish I could remember the name of this line. This is also Dunlop. This is from the Flow line. This is the Gloss 3.0, which is a very thin, very small pick. Kind of the same size and shape as one of those jazz picks, but much thicker. People use this for like speed picking on an electric for like riffing and shredding. People also use this for like gypsy jazz. There's people really enjoy thick, really thick picks for that for some reason. I'm not really familiar with the genre, so I can't really comment on that. But this is very pointy, but also very beveled. So you can still strum with it. I think it's a little noisy for strumming, but I think it's excellent for like scales and lead lines, so this sort of thing. It's good for picking out individual notes. Now, there's a few exotic and specialty variants of picks out there. There are different styles of finger picks that I've been experimenting with. There's things like this, where it kind of doesn't really catch the string, but gives you something more like a fingernail to catch the string with. I'm still experimenting with that. I'm reserving judgment for now. There's this one company called Attack Pick, that's spelled without a C, just ATTAK. And these picks are have special surfaces on them that are designed to get certain effects out of the guitar. This one claims to mimic a 12 string. I don't know if you could see that, but it's got ridges on the end of the pick. So what it does is it creates a couple impacts on each string as you're strumming. So. Leads to a bit of a fuller sound. And this one right here has little knobs coming off the end of the pick, and it is very floppy. So this is designed to kind of catch the string like a cat tongue and like create multiple strikes on it as you're pulling off. So. And it kind of does that effectively. Now, if you're trying to do scales with this, the string's gonna end up sounding more than once. It's gonna sound imprecise. That might be a good thing, that might be a bad thing, depending on what you're going for. But there's also going to be moments where this almost pulls out of your hand because it catches too well. So things like this I would use sparingly as toys or tools, not as go-tos. So that is just a quick rundown of the basics of picks. At some point I will start doing more detailed reviews of certain ones, because the cheapest and easiest way to change your tone, to change the way your guitar sounds, the way your guitar feels, is to change what you play it with. Because you can get some of these picks for cents. Like some of these are like $1.99 for a dozen. Some of them are more expensive. I think the finger picks were like $1 each a long time ago. But I really like the Dunlop ones that have actual thicknesses printed on them. This says Dunlop .025 USA, and I've bought thinner picks before that were also made by Dunlop that just look like this, and they're easier to shape with like a pair of pliers to get them where you want them, and we'll talk about the details of how to do that later. But they're also flimsy, and you'll find yourself bending them just taking them on and off, whereas that .25, that's the ticket. All right, so that's just a basic beginner rundown of different things you can use to pick the strings, and we'll talk more about that as we go into specific styles. Thank you.